Hello, my name is David Pendergrass, and you know I'm the pastor of discipleship here at West Chase. I want to take just a second to encourage you, if you're a DGroup leader especially, and I want to say thank you very, very much for the hard work you've put into this. Thank you for taking the time to read. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and all the videos that you've watched. I also thank you for checking on your people and loving them. I know that you're busy. I know that. So many of you work full-time and have family responsibilities and other hobbies and so forth. And I just thank you for what you're doing. I really do. It makes a difference. Discipleship here is happening because you're doing hard work and great, rewarding, joyful work as well. I hope that you would agree. I want to encourage you as well, as I've said a few times, and it's worth repeating, this material is going to be more dense than a lot of people are accustomed to. And I know that, and that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to have it all memorized. You won't have it memorized, and your people won't have it all memorized, and that's okay. I encourage you, just cover as much as you can. And when you're in class, you can't read every word and have the time for every word unless you meet perhaps at your home and so forth, and you have an hour and a half or two. But especially if you meet here on the campus on Sunday mornings and your time is limited to just an hour and sometimes fewer minutes than that, do the best you can. Cover the bold, do a few examples from each one and move on. And encourage your people to read this during the week. Encourage them to read it, to think about it. So when they come in on Sunday or Monday or Wednesday or Thursday, whenever your group meets, by that time, hopefully they've already read over it. And you're not having to read all the words together. But don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. All right? Thank you so much for what you're doing. I love you very much and pray for you still. Well, we've covered, I think, about 6 chapters so far. Today we're going to look at chapter 12, and that's the role of wisdom. The role of wisdom. Now, this chapter is fairly easy. It's not very complicated. Let me go over a few things, and we'll be done for this week. Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and large portions of what's known as Song of Solomon, or another text called Song of Songs. And I don't have time to now. There's a reason why it has 2 different names, and it has to go back hundreds, or almost 2,000 years, almost 1,000 years. But so Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and large portions of Song of Songs all fit the genre of wisdom literature. Now, wisdom literature tends to focus on people and behavior and about their choices. Just like today we say the word wisdom, it's about making choices. So there's not very much about doctrine. It's not about deep theology. It's not about deep philosophical speculations. Wisdom literature is not about end times. It's not about dream interpretation. It's not those things. It's about real world, rubber meets the road, daily life. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Now, a couple things about that is really important for you to know and for your people to know. One is, of course, that wisdom is not, in a biblical sense, it's not about learning from your past choices and just making choices based on your intuition and the knowledge you've gained. And that's partly there, but it's different from that. It's a different nuance, different flavor. Chiefly, wisdom in the Bible is about the capacity or ability to make godly choices. That's what wisdom is all about. So the opposite of wisdom, of making godly choices, is folly or foolishness. It has nothing to do with being unintelligent or ignorant. It has to do with the opposite of making godly choices, which would be ungodly choices, of course. So I hope you'll help your people understand that when they read wisdom literature, when the word wise or wisdom or wise man, wise person, or fool, foolish, foolishness, and so forth are used, you'll help keep reminding them, don't forget, this is not about your intelligent quotient, your IQ. It's not about those things at all. This is about whether they make godly choices or ungodly choices. Secondly, of course, wisdom typically in the Bible is presented as something which comes from God. It comes from God. Now, most of the wisdom literature we have, especially in Proverbs, and I'll say more about that in a little bit, comes from family traditions passing it down. But they would argue very quickly that it comes because God has granted it. Now, right in the middle of page 26, some typical misunderstandings. People do often read these out of context. Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, but especially Proverbs, is a favorite for people to rip things out of context and say, that's my verse. It's very common for preachers and for different expositors and teachers who either don't know better or do know better and still do what they want to do, to just have a sermon idea or a lesson idea and just do a Bible word search and find something in Proverbs and say, see, that applies to my sermon. I'm encouraging you and your people to never do that, because that's not how we treat anything in the Bible ever, of course, but certainly not in wisdom literature. So context does matter. The problem with context is that most wisdom literature in the Bible doesn't have a particular historical context. For example, in the Gospels, when Jesus talks about the temple falling, we know when he's talking about. That's around AD 30, and we know where he lives and the geography and topography and political situation. But in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job and so forth, it's not as easy to determine. And most of the time, you can't determine the historical situation in which it was situated. So when I say context, if you can determine the historical context, find it. But primarily what we're talking about is more literary context. So if one saying says one thing, another one says something else, balance it all out. Because we don't just want to pick a few here and there and make them work for us. At the bottom of page 26, wisdom in Proverbs in particular, it's mostly concerned with practical attitudes and behavior in life. So they're anecdotes, they're maxims. We have maxims and anecdotes today. We might say early to bed, early to rise makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. Was it a stitch in time saves 9, and so forth. We have little wise sayings. In many ways, not in the exact way, but in many ways, the Proverbs function like that. That is to say, they're short, they're aphoristic, that is, they're easy to memorize by an oral culture, and they don't want a bunch of context. That's not the point. No more have I said, it's good to eat your vegetables, which though I don't like vegetables, and I'm not sure why God made them for us, but that's a different story. But we have little wise sayings that it doesn't matter so much about the historical context. Proverbs is like that. Now, a couple features about Proverbs, they make a sharp division between wisdom and folly. And I have some examples here at the bottom of page 26. Violent crime, careless promising, laziness, and so forth. Proverbs also urges certain things like caring for the poor, respect for government leaders, and so forth. And if you want, you can take some time to look these things up. But I have you other things to look up. But you certainly feel free in your group if you want to go around and maybe pick out a few of these and say, hey, do you mind reading 2:22 or 23:22, 25, and so forth, and read those. Now, in the middle of page 27, here's some guidelines. Some of this is similar to what I just said, but I'll go through this very quickly. Proverbs are not automatic guarantees from God. They're not automatic guarantees from God. The particular blessings, rewards, opportunities, God's going to bless you and so forth, they're likely to follow if you choose a wise path. But we should never read these texts and think it's a one-to-one ratio between Proverbs says this, and it's immediately therefore applicable to me in this situation at work or family. That's not. There's a lot of danger in that. And I have some examples in the middle of page 27 to look up, like in Proverbs 16 and Proverbs 6. I encourage you to take a little bit of time to read those in your DGroup and answer those questions that I have there. Proverbs number 2, Proverbs must be read as a collection balanced with other text. Like I said before, I wouldn't read in isolation and say, that's my verse, that's mine, I'm going to claim that. But instead, we want to balance that out with a whole host of other verses in Proverbs, but also, of course, as it compares to Old Testament theology and then what Jesus would say and so forth. Third, Proverbs are typically written as exaggerations or hyperboles to make their point. And I have several examples all through Proverbs. I give one in Proverbs 31. But this is a real popular one in Proverbs 31. And it's really common to say this is an example for all women to follow. That's not at all how we should read Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31, especially 10 through 31, which is about this superwoman. In fact, it would be about like a maybe 8th century BC Palestinian Jewish superwoman in particular, who works all day, all night, takes care of her husband, her kids, the laundry, works agriculture in the business place. Proverbs 31 says nothing about a woman staying at home and taking care of the kids. In fact, she works all the time. So it starts out by saying, this kind of woman, who can you find? The answer is nobody. Nobody. It's hyperbole. And it fits a particular style. It's an exaggeration on purpose to demonstrate a woman who's got it all together. But that doesn't mean all wives and all women at all times need to be the people who do everything described in Proverbs 31. In fact, we have much better Christian models to follow, like Jesus. and like other women in Jesus' ministry, besides the Proverbs 31 model. But look at Proverbs 31 and glean from it certain principles about how perhaps maybe she takes care of people and so forth. She's proactive. Look at the bottom, page 27. I hope you'll read those 9 rules listed in your book on page 240 to 241. Make sure to read those aloud. On page 28, you'll see, broadly speaking, how wisdom works in Job, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. I'm not going to say much here. I hope you'll just spend some time reading it. But Job, the main thing is, as you can imagine, keep it in context. So when you read a verse, when you read a couple verses, figure out who's saying it. Remember, Job is a story about the Ha-Satan. Ha-Satan is a Hebrew word that means the accuser, the accusing one. We get the word Satan from it. It's just Hebrew. Ha-Satan comes to God the Father and says, I bet Job really doesn't love you fully. I bet he just loves you because he's got a bunch of stuff. I bet if you took away that stuff, he still wouldn't love you anymore. And God says, all right, let's see basically what happens. And when that happens, he loses everything. And Job has these quote-unquote friends who come to comfort him and offer this wisdom, like, I'd curse God and die, or you must have done something wrong. Well, what happens oftentimes when we read Job, and I've heard this in many different sermons and lessons, they'll pick out certain phrases out of Job and think it's some godly wisdom for us today. And it's not godly wisdom, it's from the false friends. But a simple reading in context will let us know that. So context matters so much. Wisdom in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is just confusing. It's just confusing. You don't hear much from it. 2 songs were written from Ecclesiastes. Great is Thy Faithfulness and another one. But most people don't read Ecclesiastes, probably because it is confusing. And there are 2 major camps in scholarship, and that's number 1. One is that it represents cynical wisdom. That is, it says over and over, all is vain, all is folly, all is evanescent. That is, it just comes in and out. Who cares? That's one view. It's a depressing look at the way life would look like without God. Other interpreters read it to say, no, it's a positive look, although eventually things do come to an end. And again, context a lot will help you over and over. There's so much more to it, but we're just giving overview at this point. And of course, Song of Solomon or Song of Songs. This is, simply put, ancient Hebrew erotica. That's what it is. It's erotic poetry. We may not read it like that today in a church service today, perhaps, though many churches do. But that is precisely what it was, and that's exactly what it is. In the ancient world, they wrote things like this. Now, 3 points here on page 28. Of course, the ethical context is heterosexual monogamous relationship, a marriage in particular. But this marriage to the one person listed, of course, is the emphasis upon the one marriage. But we know Solomon, in fact, had many wives, hundreds and hundreds of concubines. Though polygamy is not celebrated in the Old Testament, David and King Solomon had many wives because they were kings. In the ancient world, people thought if you could afford it, you can have all the wives you want. But it was never celebrated. Monogamous relationships were celebrated, and that's what's celebrated in the Song of Solomon. And of course, the emphasis upon fighting off temptation, staying faithful, and so forth are key. So we take that wisdom in context and understand what's going on in the ancient world. Good commentaries, good Bible dictionaries will help you read that in context. But it's a great book to read, and there's some really good studies on the Song of Solomon or the Song of Psalms. That's all we'll say now about wisdom literature. Again, overall, you're going to hear this over and over again. You already have. That is, as much as possible, keep it in context, and you're going to do great. Again, if you have any questions at all, let me know. Email me, give me a call, and I'll be happy to help in any way I can. God bless you. Have a great week this week in your D group.